It's cheap, it's ubiquitous, it's potent. Despite competitions coming from America, Australia, all the way to India, Scotch reigns supreme as the most popular type of whisky in the world. In addition to being known for its bagpipes and haggis, Scotland is also the birthplace of Scotch whisky. In this video, Group 2 will go into the characteristics, history and effect whisky had on the culture and economy of Scotland as well as the world. A talk about Scotland's culture without the mention of Scotch whisky is like British people without their tea every morning. Even the famous writer Mark Twain once said, "Too much of anything is bad, too much good whisky is barely enough." Scotch whisky, often called Scotch, is malt or grain whisky made in Scotland. It must be made in a manner specified by law. Being the most popular whisky in the world, Scott's renowned reputation dated back as far as 500 years ago. But here's a shocker, it's not a Scottish invention. Whisky was first mentioned in 1494 when Friar John Core ordered malt to make aquavitae, the predecessor of Scotch, which had already existed in Ireland for almost 3 centuries. Later, in 1644, the Parliament decided to tax it, leading to an increase in illicit whisky distilling across Scotland, which didn't stop until 1823. Not long after, the real world conquest happened thanks to an Irish lad named Aeneas Coffey with his recipe for lighter flavoured whisky. Then, during the 1880s, the severe phylloxera beetle devastated most of the French vineyards, bringing the wine industry to its knee. Since wine, brandy and cognac were awfully scarce, people turned to the Scottish potion. Scotch became a worldwide sensation ever since, topping as the world's premier whisky, with 39 bottles shipped worldwide every second. Let's move on to the characteristics of Scotch regarding colour, taste and how it's made. For those who have never seen Scotch whisky, take a good look at this. That's pure quality right there. The colours of Scotch range from light yellow, gold, bronze to this beautiful dark amber. Just by the hue, we can guess what type of cask it was aged in. Interestingly, Scotch is clear as gin from the start, but begins to adopt its colour after aging. Now that the eyes are satisfied, let's see how it tastes. To obtain a complete experience, it's best to try out the drink from 5 primary regions of Scotch whisky. First, Speyside whisky tends to be frugal with peat and lavish with nutty fruity flavours. Second, the Highlands, also including the island, offer a diversity of flavours and characters, from lighter whiskies all the way through salty coastal malts. Third, the Lowlands, soft and smooth malt with gentle, elegant reminiscent, a perfect choice for pre-dinner drinks. Fourth, Islay whisky. It's pungent with peat, pepper to purity, carbolic to floral. Finally, Campbelltown, varied and full of flavour as hint of salt, fruit, vanilla mingle in whiskies of robust and rich character. Indeed, to produce such high quality spirit demands time and skill. While there are 2 types of Scotch, malt and grain, in this video we will only focus on how to make single malt whisky. What we need are fresh spring water, malted barley and yeast, 3 basic ingredients of a good single malt whisky. After being fermented and distilled, these simple ingredients are then filled into oak cask, left to mature. At least 3 years later, but often longer, after the angels have had their share, the casks are then prized open and malt whisky is born. When it comes to Scotch, it would be a pity if we did not mention the difference between Highlands and Lowlands whisky. In a nutshell, the Wash Act of 1784 and the Distillers Act of 1786 have imposed different laws and policies on the Lowlands and the Highlands, which was extremely disadvantageous for the lowland Scotch industry afterwards. In detail, in 1783, harvest was incredibly poor and famine gripped the Highlands. Distilling was restricted everywhere in Scotland, and many places the tax of alcohol were increased. During this period, the Wash Act of 1784 introduced new taxes on whisky and distillery capacity. In the Highlands, distilleries were taxed at a lower rate but were limited to one tiny still per distillery. When washes were being distilled much more slowly, the whisky had more flavor than whisky produced elsewhere. Hence, Highlands producers focused on making a quality whisky to feed the demand in Scotland City, and later boomed into a robust economy. On the other hand, in the lowlands, a higher tax was imposed. Not only that, the tax subsequently increased over the years as well. Eventually, the cumulative effect of the increases in taxation led to the virtual bankrupting of the Scotch whisky industry. As a result, lowlands began to produce low-quality whisky, which was virtually undrinkable and mostly exported to England to convert into gin, satisfying England's gin craze at the time. The fact is, whisky soaks into Scottish culture. There are more than 100 distilleries and whisky bars all over Scotland. Whisky bars run by people who are evangelical about Scotland's favourite beverage. Besides, Scotch whisky tourism has developed around the industry, with distilleries being the third most visited attractions in Scotland. When it rains, as it often does there, the showers often elicit a cheery "That's tomorrow's whisky" from the local. More specifically, "That's tomorrow's whisky" is short for "Today's rain is tomorrow's whisky," a Scottish saying essentially expressing optimism about the future. Moreover, whisky is so popular that there are two special days for it. On May 19th, the World Whisky Day, and on March 17th, National Whisky Day. To emphasize the influence of whisky on Scottish culture, academic, cultural commentator, and radio celebrity David Dykes, who was also a passionate lover of Scotch whisky, states that the proper drinking of Scotch whisky is more than indulgence. It is a toast to civilization, a tribute to the continuity of culture, a manifesto of man's determination to use the resources of nature to refresh mind and body and enjoy to the full the senses with which he has been endowed. Being the world's favorite drink, whisky contributes significantly to the economy of its homeland, Scotland, and other countries all over the world. Let's take a look at Scotland. In its home country, Scotch appears to have a special connection to the number 3. It contributes 3.8 billion indirectly to the gross value added of Scotland. Further 30,000 jobs are supported through the supply chain of exporting whisky. It represents 3/4 of Scottish exports, with the vast bulk of sales abroad. On top of that, Scotch whisky is being circulated all around the world. Specifically, whisky is being consumed in 200 markets from America, France, all the way to Venezuela. Despite the challenge of Brexit and the high alcohol duties in the UK, the whisky industry has been growing in recent years in record exports, reaching 4.7 billion in 2018. The US remains the industry's biggest market, with more than £1 billion of the spirit imported last year, up to £280 million in 1994, even though Scotch whisky exported to the US faces a 25% tariff. Meanwhile, the European Union was the second largest importer, taking 30% of global value, and Canada in 2000 had more than 20% of the Scotch whisky market, with brands including Chivas Regal, Ballantine's, and Glenlivet. Whisky also owned brands such as Johnnie Walker, which goes worldwide, J&B with its strength in France, Buchanan's, and Old Parr for Latin America. Interestingly, despite these impressive numbers, Scotch still only accounts for 1/5 of the world's total whisky. If, in your house right now, There is a bottle of scotch. What should you do with it? Whenever someone looks for the right way to best enjoy scotch, they would get the advice to get a Glencairn glass. This is a tulip-shaped glass perfectly suitable for whiskey. Raymond Davison designed the glass specifically to encourage the drinker to appreciate the nosing and palate of whiskey. At the same time, the glass is functional and robust enough for a bar environment. The glass caught the attention of the master blenders in the Scotch whisky industry and received recommendations from them. The shape suits 35mm pour while allowing for the addition of water, keeping an optimum amount of liquid in contact with air to allow the aromas to develop. Here are some steps to actually enjoy a scotch. Obviously, get yourself a Glencairn glass of whiskey and some dark chocolate or cheese or baked salmon. Bring the glass to your nose and take short smells. Remember to keep your mouth and nose open since this is a strong beverage. Then you drink it. There is no specific way when it comes to actually drink a scotch. The best way is the way you like. Some people like to let the scotch sit in their mouth and chew it. Some don't. It's sort of a personal preference. Take your time after the first sip. Now the smell of scotch and the flavor comes from your drink, your mouth, and your throat. Have a small bite of chocolate. Enjoy. Either malt or grain, Scotch whisky undoubtedly shaped the life of Scottish people. While the creators of this video do not wish to endorse alcoholism and the violence or misery that results from it, we cannot deny the impact whisky had on the culture and the economy of Scotland specifically and the UK in general.